to those of you who are not from Texas, in the Second Great War. In the early 40s, I was 6, 7, 8 years old. War was raging all over the world. Hitler's Nazis were marching across Europe. Japan had bombed Pearl Harbor, and the whole world really was in an upheaval with the war things going on, particularly in the United States. What an upheaval that was. And Amarillo was very, very important to the war effort, because not only was there a great big Air Force base, a strategic air command, but there also was a huge naval station there, and Amarillo Harbor was filled with battleships and destroyers, PT boats, even carriers going in and out. Downtown Amarillo was filled with military personnel looking for something to do at their leisure time. It was a very emotional time, and we were very, very patriotic. We wore our patriotism like a badge of courage. We were proud to be Americans. Now, there are a lot of things that went on that got kids our age involved in the war effort. For instance, during the school year, we would take our nickels and dimes and quarters up to the school once a week, and we would buy war bonds and war stamps. And you had little pink stamps. You pasted them in a little booklet, like a green stamp book, if anybody remembers those. And when you filled the book up with those pink stamps, you could turn it in for a $25 war bond. And I longed to be able to buy a $100 war bond, because when that happened, it was a huge deal. The teacher would call the class to order, and she'd say something like, "Boys and girls, Timmy Stewart has just won a $100 war bond." And we would jump from our seats and jump up and down and cheer and carry on. And Timmy Stewart was the hero for the rest of the day. I don't know if we didn't have the $67.50 or whatever it cost of a $100 war bond, because they were mature, you see. Or maybe my daddy thought we'd lose the money, I'd lose the money before I got to school with it, but I never had that moment of glory, and I really wanted to be able to do that. Another thing we did every week during the school year, the teacher would call us to attention and say, "Boys and girls, put away your books and get out your knitting." And we'd stuff our books under our desk, and we'd pull out a little tangled ball of yarn and 2 knitting needles. And for the next hour, we would knit. Boys and girls alike. A mama had come in and taught us how to knit, and would take us the entire school term, but by the end of the year, we would have each produced a little square about this big. We were little kids, let's not laugh. Another mama would come in and sew all those squares together and make a blanket. And we would ship that overseas to cover up some wounded soldier or keep some little war orphan warm. We were so proud to be able to do that. Now we would take our wagons, we'd go through the neighborhood, we'd knock on doors, and we'd see if they had any old newspapers or maybe coat hangers or anything that was paper or metal that we could collect. And we'd take it up to the school. That was the collection point. And we were doing our best to help the war effort. We were proud of that. Now, my best friend back then was a little girl that lived across the alley from us. Her name was Sarah Kelly, and we called her Sarah Dew. And Sarah Dew and I looked exactly alike. We were 2 skinny little old girls with long, stringy brown hair. We had little round gold rimmed glasses, our mouths full of braces, and we thought we were something else. Now, Sarah Dew, we called her, she had a sister named Joanne, we called Jopie, and they had 2 brothers that were way older than we were. And they were both in the Navy. And we worried about it all the time. I particularly worried about her brother Kenneth, because I've been in love with Kenneth since I was 5 years old. He was the only boy I have ever known that could walk on his hands on the roof of their house. If that's not special, I don't know what it is. Now we would have long debates about whether we would rather be in the Navy, knowing you would probably get blown up out of the sea by a submarine, and if you managed to survive the blast and get to a lifeboat, you knew that submarine was going to surface and rake the water with machine gun fire, and you weren't going to survive anyway. Or would we rather be in the Air Force, knowing you'd probably be blown out of the air by anti-aircraft fire, and if you were able to parachute down, you'd be behind enemy lines, and you would have to hook up with the underground, and who knows how that would work out. We knew that the Marines were the toughest and the strongest because wasn't John Wayne always a Marine? And we knew too that you never wanted to be in the Army because then you were just in a foxhole and people were throwing grenades at you. I think we watched way too many movies. We did go to the movie all the time, and at the intermission, they'd turn on the house lights. Everybody would stand up, we'd put our hands over our hearts, and we'd sing the Star Spangled Banner. And we'd cry. We were so proud to be Americans. We just watched John Wayne battling that Guadalcanal. I would see Van Johnson get his legs blown off 30 seconds over Tokyo. It was a very, very emotional time, and we were proud to be Americans. Now, we believed with all of our hearts that there were enemy spies in Amarillo, and we were constantly Now, we didn't worry too much about the Japanese spies because Amarillo being what it was at that time, anyone of Asian heritage would have stood out like a sore thumb. So we didn't worry about the Japanese, but we knew the German spies were everywhere. And we were always looking for them. Well, if we saw a car parked too long on a side street, we were sure it was German spies. They were probably in there making diagrams, taking pictures of all the military installations. And we'd ride our bicycles real close and try to peek in the windows just to see what they were doing. No telling what we might have seen. Well, one afternoon, our little gang, and that would be Sarah Dew and her sister Joanne, who we called Jopie, and my two sisters, Pat and Melanie, and I, we just did everything together. We were down at the Walgreens drugstore, sitting in a booth. We were drinking cherry Cokes and 800s and blowing the paper off the straws at each other when we chanced to hear a conversation in the booth right behind us. Now, at first, we didn't understand what was being said. Jopie shushed us real quick, and she had this wild red hair and this freckle face, so when she shushed us, because she commanded authority, we got quiet real fast and began to listen. Well, at first, we couldn't understand, but we right away began to recognize that deep-throated, guttural German accent. It was German spies, and the booth right behind us. We couldn't believe it. We began to listen real good, and it turned out these spies had been in Amarillo for weeks, and they had indeed been taking pictures and drawing diagrams of all the military installations. Amarillo Air Force Base, the Strategic Air Command, Amarillo Naval Station, and all the ships that were out there in the harbor. And they were supposed to pass off all that information just in 3 days' time to a submarine that was going to come right where we always played. We knew exactly what they were talking about. Well, they finished their conversation. They got up to leave, and when they did, we peeked around the corner to see what they looked at. Wow. It confirmed what we already knew. They were medium height, and they had on long dark overcoats with their collars pulled up. Had on men's hats, fedoras pulled way down over the eyes. It just confirmed what we knew in German spies. Well, we turned back to each other. Our mouths were just agape. We could not believe what we had heard. Well, we knew if we went to the authorities, really, even our parents, nobody's going to believe a bunch of 6, 7, 8-year-old kids. So we knew we'd have to make a plan ourselves. We began to take the notes. Well, Sarah took the notes, and we all planned it out. We felt pretty good about it, so we went on home. Well, the next 3 days were really just, we were trying so hard to keep that secret. And we were trying to act natural, like everything was copacetic. Well, it finally came the day of the rendezvous. We were so nervous. We had our dinner that night, and then we went out in the backyard. We always did, all 5 of us would get around. We'd dance around the willow tree. We called it our willow tree ballet. We danced around. Now, my family always retired pretty early. So at 10 o'clock, our house was quiet. Next thing I knew, one of my sisters is shaking me awake and saying, "Shh, get up, get dressed." We pulled on our blue jeans right over our pajamas, put on t-shirts, carried our sneakers in our hand, and went tiptoeing down the stairs. Now we had to go by our parents' bedroom to get out of the house, and we did it one at a time. I could hear my mama even breathing, I could hear my daddy snoring, and we tiptoed out. Got out of the back door, we sat down the steps and pulled our sneakers on, and we ran to the alley, which is where we were going to meet Sarah and Jody. They were already there. We checked our equipment. We each had our Girl Scout or Brownie flashlights. And we also had our rubber guns. Maybe you played with rubber guns as kids. Ours were cut out and they looked like pirates' guns. And if you're not familiar with rubber guns, you attached a spring clothespin on the butt of your gun, and then we would cut inner tubes about that wide, and you'd hook that on the end of your gun and put it in the spring clothespin. Then when you were ready to fire it, you just released the clothespin. It's some serious damage. Constantly being admonished by our parents. Now you girls, don't be pointing at each other's eyes. You're gonna put your eyes out. We played with those guns for years and no one ever put him on. Well, we had our rubber guns and our flashlights, so we took off running for the beach. Now it was one of those nights where it was a full moon, but it was also very, very cloudy. So it'd be real dark, because it'd be all cloudy, and then it'd be real bright. But it didn't matter to us because we knew exactly where that beach was, because where we played all the time. So we ran down there as fast as we could, and then when we got there, we began to hunker down behind the sand dunes and the tumbleweeds. And we waited. And it seemed like, gosh, we waited forever. We just waited and waited. We thought, well, did we get the day wrong? Maybe we changed our minds. Well, then we heard the crunch of the automobile tires on the gravel road about 100 yards out. We could see a dark-colored coupe, looked like a Chevy from where we were, right, pulling up there, turned off the lights, and then just sat there for a while. Pretty soon the doors opened. 2 men got out, and they began to walk down toward the water. As soon as they got close, we could see it was the same 2 spies we'd seen at the Walgreens drugstore. We watched what they were doing. They walked right down to the water, and then they just stood there. They had on those same long overcoats and those fedora hats pulled on them. And they stood there and stared out at the water. At precisely 12 o'clock midnight, one of them reached in his pocket and pulled out a big old flashlight, and he began to give the signal. Blink, 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 blink. And then like a great rush of water, like some sea serpent, this submarine came emerging out of the water. About that time, the moon went under the clouds. It got real dark, and we couldn't really make out what was happening. Just squinting, you couldn't really make out. But we could hear the sound of the hatch opening in that submarine. By squinting, we could barely make out 2 men climbing out of that submarine and throwing a little rubber dinghy over the side and getting in and rowing into shore. As we watched, the 2 spies on shore pulled men, they shook hands all around, and then they turned and began to walk back up to that Chevrolet coupe. Well, we knew they were going to exchange information at that point. It was going to be like another Pearl Harbor. They were going to blow the whole place up, all the military installations. The minute they got up toward the car, which was 100 yards up, we ran down to that little dinghy boat they'd come in on.
Blew it up.
My sister's Pat was the oldest, so she was in charge. She told Sarah Dew and I to run as fast as we could, as fast as the wind, to the nearest shore patrol station, which was about 1.5 miles. We took off running just as fast as we could. As we pulled away, we could hear what those other girls were doing. They were firing those rubber guns in the bottom of that rubber dinghy.
Yeah!
They knew it was just a matter of time before it would sink. We ran and ran and ran. You know how hard it is to run in that fluffy sand? And our little skinny legs were just working so hard, and then our lungs were just burning. We couldn't catch our breath. And we ran that whole 1.5 miles. When we finally got there, we beat on the door of the shore patrol station. And when they opened the door, we just fell into their arms and we blurted out everything we knew. Well, in a matter of seconds, the whole place is lit up like the middle of the day. We could hear sirens coming from every direction. They sent emergency vehicles down. They arrested all of those spies, the ones that came in on the submarine. They arrested the whole crew of the sub, and all those spies were on land, took them off somewhere. I don't even know where. They towed that submarine into Amarillo Harbor. It is still there to this day. It has been the biggest tourist attraction in Amarillo. Then they called our parents. You can imagine how surprised they didn't even know we were out of the house. They were pretty angry. But when they found out what we had actually done, they were very, very proud of us. Mm-hmm. Now the next morning in the Amarillo Globe-Times, which is the local newspaper, there was a picture of all 5 of us right across the front page. Sarah Dew and our braces were just shining, and they had 3-inch headlines that said, "Kids Save Texas and the Nation." And we did, you know.